Oh, that's perfect. I can hear myself now, which is not the best thing I've done today. But let's go back to my story since we couldn't hear it. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. Not the best thing I've done today. Oh, good. I'm repeating on myself. On my second screen, let's not do that. So, in high school, I was in band. And in band, one of the competitions we would do was something called sight reading. And this is where you would be given a piece of music that you've never seen before. You had to read it over, look at the time signature, look at the speed, all of that, and play it purely from first reading it. And I was really bad at this. I sort of play music in my head when I play. And so I never succeeded at this. But this idea gave me the notion of how code works for me. Back in 100 years ago when I started coding, debuggers weren't really effective. We did a lot of right line debugging and that sort of thing. And so early on when I was doing DBase and Clipper, you'd run it, you'd see what happened, you would read the code and try to fix it. And in fact, there was a language called Visual Objects that the build took so long that you really spent a lot of time reading the code to try to find what the bug was, because you were going to eat up 15 minutes every time you built a solution. And that was just arduous back in the day. And this got me thinking, because I've talked to a lot of developers that are using the debugger to understand code. And while there's nothing wrong with that, I think the ability to look at a piece of code, understand what it does, or what it's supposed to do at least, is a skill worth honing. And so I picked up a domain called Sight Reading, and this it's called Sight Read Code, and that's going to allow me to show users some code, have them try to figure out what it is. It's not really testing, but who knows? Because all I've done so far is gotten the domain and written this header. Let me actually switch sources to my coding so you can actually see what I'm doing. And so all I've got now is just the sight reading planning. That's it. Not a lot to it. And I wanted to sort of show you through these hour-long solutions how I sort of think about the problem. And so I'm going to start with just the problem of developers who want to learn to read code better, right? That's the problem I'm trying to solve. And so there's a few things that I want to think about as things that users would do. So user stories. Well, I don't work in user stories all the time, but this will help me. Wants to see if they can read code well. Wants to see if they are right. And finally wants to maybe interact with other users about the code. And so an important part of what I think is interesting here is I want the answer to be really crowdsourced. I'm not going to write 100 or 1,000 of these and expect that a multiple choice quiz is going to give them something they can put on their resume. That's not the purpose of this at all. And who knows if this will really matter long term. But for me, it's an interesting problem to solve. So what do I think the tech is going to be? I think for the back end, because of what I know, I'm going to choose .NET Core and probably minimal APIs just to handle the data. It's not going to be a ton of data there. I might add authentication, but that's about all that I care about. And because I like Vue, I'm going to do it in Vue, because if I'm not going to get paid to do something, I might as well do something I enjoy, right? And so that sort of makes me start to think about the data model. all the source I'm going to write here, I'm going to go ahead and put in a repo so you can see it as it evolves. But I really want to get these concepts first. So we have the idea of a code block, right? And that's just text that is the code. And then we might have sort of I'm looking for answers and explanation of the code. And the other piece that I think is important here, actually, let me make sure my volume is still working. Okay, good, thankfully. The idea, I'm not sure whether answers needs to be threaded or not, or what, but that for a particular code block, we're going to have a one-to-many relationship to answers. So that as people respond to answers, as people enter their answers, I think we also are going to want responses to those answers. Because I really want people to be able to discuss it or just like or unlike it and those sorts of things. So I'm going to put reactions as well as another piece of data. Reactions to code. Now, the whole system for handling the answers and responses and reactions, there might be a good open source solution for doing that. I know that Disqus is one, but I really hate the way Disqus works, so I don't really want to tie it to that. But I'm open to not storing it, not storing those myself, but using some third party. But I don't want something that's so heavy that it really is a discussion board with different categories, and I don't want it to be. If I want it to be really simple, I might end up just writing this myself because the kinds of ideas here are going to be pretty simple. Oh, we also probably need has read, which is red flag per user for code blocks and answers and responses. So some way to mark that a particular user has marked something as read. And what's interesting to me is, you look at YouTube, which you're probably on watching me right now, and on YouTube, they lose the idea of what has been read so easily. I go back to the same video, and I'm like, I'm sure I watched this before. Why wasn't marked as unread? So that's a sort of peculiar part of this. Now, I think authentication is going to be important, but I don't want to be responsible for it. So support third-party auth. And this is mostly just to support the idea that people aren't just going to be able to put in garbage answers without identifying themselves. This is really an idea to stop spam and those sorts of things. So I was asked, why not use Blazor for the front end? Mostly because I'm not a Blazor guy. Like, Blazor's perfectly fine and it's for a certain audience. I'm not a big fan of how it works. I feel like it mixes some separation of code and design, and it's just a little too magical. Now, with the kinds of things we're doing, the speed difference between something like Blazor client, where it's being done in WebAssembly, isn't going to be appreciably different. Now, there are cases where that WebAssembly can be much faster, but I like the faster startup speed of something like Vue than Blazor. So that's mainly the reason. Because this is such a simple site as well, I'm not going to get some of the other benefits I see of Blazor, like be able to easily handle or use .NET Aspire and those sorts of things. We're going to have really a single server. We might need to scale that out, but even that I don't think is going to be a terribly big deal because this is a free, simple website. I have some, what are they called? I have some rants, and one of them is specifically about Blazor and what I don't love. So that's why I'm not using Blazor. I'm just not a fan I don't want to dissuade anyone from using it if you're having a good time with it, but I never did. So Zaki asks, what do you mean by third-party auth? So what I mean by third-party auth is something like Azure AD, support Google IDs, Microsoft IDs. I probably should support Facebook, but I hate the company, so I might, just to be spiteful. So I'm talking about not storing my own credentials. I'm talking about using someone else's credentials to identify them. And that ID will be tied to some of these answers and responses and has read and those sorts of things. Because I just don't want to be responsible for the complexity of it. I'm going to be using probably JWT to talk to the back end, and the front end can prompt people to log in with whatever provider they want. So I think this is, especially for sort of a public-facing, simple website, having people use their third party instead of thinking that I'm going to go down the road of creating all my first-party authentication or using other services. Oh, and Auth0 as well. Just because some people have corporate IDs, and Auth0 can really help there. So we've got a bit of a roadmap, about 20 minutes in. This is not going to be brilliant yet, but this is it's a good starting point. Now, authentication is going to come much later. I'm not even going to worry about it in our early development. And I kind of want to start just kicking this off with some code. So if anyone is curious about what I'm using here, this is a markup editor note taker called Obsidian that I'm obsessed with. It does a really good job of Azure typing to format it as markup, in fact. This is the read mode, and really these are just, you notice when I click into it, it shows the underlying markup. And so if I did user, actually let's do this just to give it some structure, right? So it's just typing markup, which I love, and so this ends up just being text on a disk someplace, and so big fan. But that's not what you came. So Sean, will this live stream be available to watch later in your channel? Absolutely. This will be in a new what do they call them? Playlist of just these twice a week live stream. So if you can't watch right now, feel free to remember you can come back and watch it later. Should be available within half an hour of the live stream being done. It should automatically that's one of the reasons I decided to use YouTube instead of Twitch. I just feel like Twitch isn't where all my other content is, so I wanted it to be all together. So thanks, Nick, for your question. So let's do some things. I'm going to open up, I'm going to open up a console, and I use the Quake console quite a bit, so we're going to start there. And let's go to projects, and thanks, Nick. I know Sunday afternoons is not always the easiest for families to be watching, so hope you enjoy it and get something out of it. So I'm going to create a new project in my project folder. I'm just going to call it site read code. And I'm going to use actually mcd, which is a little command I have to just so I can go into the directory in one piece. Obviously that's not doing anything brilliant, but you'll see me use some of these tools that I've used, and I'm happy to share them. Zaki, the plugin for what? If you can tell me which plugin you're talking about. Is it the one for Markdown, or is it the one? Because right now I don't think we're using any plugins. So let me know. I'll try to get to your answer. And I'm going to create a source directory because, of course, that's what I'm going to do. and I'm going to do npm init. Nope. I'm going to do git init. Sorry. So we now have a Git project as a starting point, and in fact, I'm just going to save this as, I think they have it as export. Well, I'll get it out there in a little bit. Let me touch a readme.md just so we'll have that later. And we'll need a git ignore, and I'm using a git ignore command line that you can install to create a git ignore for me. And I'm doing it in Visual Studio because I'm going to be using both Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code together. So let's go into source, and I could do .NET new. One thing you'll see me do a lot is N. I have copied from Scott Hanselman somewhere a way you can alias the .NET just so these things are easier. And I'm going to say Web API. Actually, let's list these. So the VSC for taking notes, it's not a Visual Studio. It's a whole tool called Obsidian. So this isn't Visual Studio Code at all. It's actually a separate tool, and it has these notions of vaults, and the vaults end up just being a folder somewhere. And I have this actually vault on my Dropbox, so I have this available on my phone and anywhere else. But at the end of the day, it ends up being just text files, MD files. So if you go to, I'm going to guess it's obsidian.com. We'll see how wrong I am with there. Obsidian notes. Obsidian.md. Of course it's .md. This is the tool I'm talking about. This isn't a sponsorship. It's just a tool. So I did a quick help because I just want to get the emptiest of web APIs. Yeah, it is web. I'm using .NET 8 here just because that's what's installed. So new web API, and I'm going to name it site read code.web or .api actually. It's going to do its little thing, and hopefully it'll be in site read API. And I'm just going to open it up in Visual Studio. I'm not using the preview. I'm going to use the main version that .NET is supporting. How are we doing in time? Oh, we're about halfway there. And so for me, most of the server-side stuff I'm going to do right now is just writing some simple APIs with minimal APIs just to mock up our whole story here. So I'm going to get rid of all their code. Because I don't care about that. And I'm going to leave this all the way it is. And I'm actually going to remove the all the Swagger stuff because for what we're doing, it's pretty simple and we're not going to be doing any of that. So got almost nothing going on, right? So let's go ahead and create our first API. Get code. And And here we're just going to return a random piece of code that we can just start working with. Obviously, all this will change as we go on, but I like to just map this out and just say return. Nope, I was right the first time. Oh, there it is. If you don't use the triple quotes, you'll get to really love it. So I'm just going to say function foo. Because remember, this code doesn't have to be just C#. It could be anything. Write console dot write foo. So, simplest of things. So there's a question from Nick, or a mention, did I ever do the advent of code? I've done some of it. Some of them made my head hurt, so I didn't. It's one of those things that I've never done the advent of code, certainly in a live stream. There is a Brad, I want to say Abrams, but that's not his name. I'll put it in the notes for this video when I'm done, but there's a great guy who does the advents every year, and I love watching him sort of work through the problems in sort of the same way I am here. So for what I'm doing here, I think we're actually pretty good. Well, good luck, Nick. It's not the easiest. So I'm going to do something I won't always do, but I'm trying to get my habit, and that is add a new project to this solution. And I'm going to use the standalone TypeScript view project. Now, this is a project type that simply builds a view project. So I'll say site read code. Let me think. App. Let's call it app. And I'm not going to add integration for ASP.NET Web API because the way I want to use it is going to be a little different. But let's go ahead and create that. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually use an extension in Visual Studio called Open with Visual Studio Code, and I'm immediately going to go open it in Visual Studio Code because it is a much better experience for me. And I like cleaning up this. So app view takes these components, which we're going to get rid of, has all this header, and I'm just going to create, let's say, an H1 site read code. And I hate all this inline, but we'll get there. Let's get rid of the components and icons because we want to build our own. And if I were to run this, they usually start easier, Daniel. That's interesting that day one. When did they start? Well, thanks for joining us, Bogdan, I'll say. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but hopefully that's a good guess. Now, if you haven't done Vue before, Vue uses Vite, which of course isn't recognized because I haven't installed everything yet. Vite is a developer time, does more things, but I'm going to mostly use it as a development time debugger. So, thanks, Nick, December 1st. And this just allows me to iterate really fast. I run this once and I'm all good. And so let's go ahead and run it. And I'm going to open this. And one thing you'll notice is that I'm opening this in Edge. And I mostly do this because Edge doesn't have any of the add-ins that make me furious. So this is just a clean browser to work with. I use Chrome, as you'll see here. It's my main browser. And we've got it running. Let's go ahead and make a couple other changes to really leave us with nothing. and that is, let's delete the base, and in the main, I'm just going to delete it all. And so now we have a really beautiful app. And evidently I put another one of those there. So far so good, right? I think we're almost done. Here we have an app. And what we'd like to do is, let me think. First thing I think I'm going to do is, let me create another console, is add Tailwind, CSS, PX, Tailwind, init. This will do some of the work for creating some files we need for Tailwind. We also need to Tailwind, CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. Now, I've done so many talks on Tailwind, that's why I remember these, but you're not really expected to remember all these. And then here, I'm just going to add my Tailwind pieces. Tailwind base, Tailwind, and to get the IntelliSense you're seeing, I am using the Tailwind add-in in Visual Studio Code. Just make this a little easier. And the way the Tailwind works with Vue or a lot of the others is, as long as the main CSS you're pulling into your project, which we are by looking at main.ts, it's pulling this in. If it sees these base classes, it's going to generate Tailwind in the project. It isn't a separate build. And so if we go to our main page, and let's say with full background gray, let's say, go back to our build and see what it didn't like. Oh, because I added things, we're going to have to restart it. So press R and it'll restart it. Oh, and it's saying we forgot to tell it what code. So let's go over here. And again, Tailwind is going to allow us to put in what kind of files to search for. If you're too loose with this, you might accidentally be searching through all of Node modules, which is why you have to opt in instead of opt out. So here I'm going to say source any directory, any file that ends in JS, TS, HTML, Vue. And that should be enough, right? So we go back here. We now have our slightly less ugly code, right? We're not doing anything all that interesting, but we can start to see how this should be. Font bold, text 2XL. Great. And let's make this a header in here so that we can actually do the things we think we need to do. We'll put a section for where our real code is, and we'll get to that in a minute. And here I'm just going to say width 96. Oops, I'm actually going to say container and margin X, which is left and right, auto. So now we'll see that we have a little, that the header itself is centered, and we'll do the same thing for the section. And let's make this blue, make it kind of a dark blue, and text white. Nothing all that too interesting here yet. We have our little header set up there, and I'm not a big fan of it, so let's go ahead and give it a little margin. Whoops, give it a little padding, I mean. And let's say min height screen, just so we are starting to look like a page. Now this is going to use the viewport units to make this the minimum height of this to be one screen. And as you add content below, it'll still scroll down nice and easy. So I like where we're getting to. And we're going to probably want a menu up here. So I'm going to do it as unordered list. And I'm going to put arbitrary values in here right now, but I'll just put home and code. Of course, that's looking exactly the way we want. And if you haven't used Tailwind before, there is an interesting element to this, is that one of the things that Tailwind does is it resets, let's leave it at 150, yeah, or 125, yeah. It resets all of the CSS. So that's why, even though these are unordered list, you're not going to see bullet points, because literally everything has the same font, so font and size, so you can really decide what you want. So because we have these two elements, let's go to our header, and I'm also going to add, now one thing you might not know is you can format these like this, and it does make it a little easier when you have a lot of these to do that. In fact, I normally go ahead and do something like that. Now here I'm going to say flex, so that's flex designed, and then I'm going to say justify between, so it's going to make as much space in between it for the elements that are here. And now we have home and read code here, again up and down, but at least we can see that they're now going to be on opposite sides. And I'm going to go ahead and add flex here as well, so that it goes left to right. And I'm going to go ahead and say margin left or right. Let's just add some 2 so that they're separate. Let's do it to both. Won't be exactly to the side, but it'll be good enough. And let's make these look a certain way. So let's say actually I want to make these look a certain way. So let's add these classes. Let's say padding 3, background gray 500, hover gray 800. Now again, if you haven't done Tailwind before, these classes are sort of built in as utility classes. But one of the things that's interesting is it also supports these sort of decorators. I know that Tailwind has a name for them, but suddenly I can't remember. But this is essentially saying apply this background color, almost mistyped it, only when it's hovering. So let's see what that looks like. So we're starting to sort of see that we can have an experience that's more like a button or something like that. And I don't like that gray, so let's actually go background transparent, which is another magic color, right? That'll be good enough. And while I could do this for all of these, one of the magic things in Vue, of course, is that I can have a script, a style, and I'm going to say scoped. What this does is allow styles to be applied just on elements that are inside of our view. These aren't global styles. And so if I grab these, because Tailwind is still supported in the CSS down here, as I'm going to say dot menu button. I'm just going to create a class for them. And I'm going to use a command called add apply, which allows me to just use those same helper classes. So as I styled it up here, I then can reuse that, and I'll just say menu. Come on. Is that what I called it? Menu button. And I can just copy this as well. Now we have our look and feel. Not crazy about exactly how this looks, but I think it's a good start. And we'll see that it's working in that way. Banksy, I'm hoping, you can always slow down and go back. I cover a lot of this in my Pluralsight course as well, but we're going to be doing things a little bit different than I did in my Pluralsight course. Cover some of these same ideas. So we've got a lot of sort of the design of that initial page, and we have this section that's going to allow us to inject things. So I'm going to actually bring in, I actually want to bring in a router. So first thing I'm going to need to do is, let's go over to our other console, npm install view router. And I'm going to create a new folder here called router. We may only have one object in here, but we may not. So let's create a new file, and I'm going to call it index.ts. Now I'm doing index.ts specifically so that up here we can import it from that. So I can say import use router, which is something we're going to use from router. In fact, I'm going to say tilde router because that should get it there. Now this is saying it's not used, and this is not good because we actually haven't added anything in here. So view router. I'm going to use Copilot, and let's see what happens. Add well, that's not helpful. Let's try one more thing. I'm not doing everything in Copilot, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Implement a view router in TypeScript. Wow, Copilot is not, it's not great. There we go. That just helps us make things a little simpler. Except this is the old style view router, so we're not going to actually use that. We're not going to say view use at all or use view, but this will be close enough because we've got the router configs here, and let's go ahead and make this a code. We'll call it code. And these have them loading these in chunks, but for me, I'm just going to go ahead and say at call this our home view. We'll have to implement these, and let's call these our code view. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. Oh, we're not actually going to use import type. Probably shouldn't have allowed them to do it at all. But let's continue down real quick. And the other piece we're looking for here is instead of view router is use router. Routes. Let's import these that don't exist. we're getting close to breaking for today, but I will be back on Thursday at 4. Code view. So let's just mock these up, and then I'll probably just go through a couple of questions real quick. And I'm going to say views. I'm going to do something that not everybody does, but I'm going to create a views folder. And I'm going to create a new, oh, I never installed that. Oh, no. Yeah, I did. And code view and index.ts. I don't like to point down to these every time. I feel like it's a little bit much. So let's go to our code view. There'll just be a placeholder, and I'll copy this to our home view. Now I'm going to have to remember how this works. Let's just do this. Export from home view and code view. Why doesn't it like that? That is interesting. It's not within the file list of project. Yeah, that's not the problem. So let's use our trusty export from import.js. Now, hopefully this will be a lesson to the wise that I don't remember everything either. Yeah. The only thing I can imagine is as home view, but I doubt that's the problem. No. Wonder why it hates that. Let's see. That was embarrassing. I'm pretty sure this is just going to fail now. Let's go ahead and throw these in here. How much time we have? Oh, we only have 52 seconds. I'm going to check this in as is. It's not going to work. We're going to come back in on Thursday at 4 o'clock and continue with our broken code here. I'm going to really try not to write any code that isn't explicitly part of these views so you don't miss a thing. But thanks everyone for coming. This has been a lot of stress, I mean fun, and I appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe to this so you'll be notified of the new live streams. That'll help get you back out and keep consistent. And if you miss them, of course, they'll be on my YouTube channel, right as it is. Oh, my face has been almost out of frame the whole time. We'll fix that for next time. Thanks for joining me. I will see you next time. See, there's where my face